Hey everybody, this is Dave. Here's Bob saying a dumb thing.
Yes, hello. This is Graham Wellington.
Told you. And we're going to watch episode 6, or do we call it, what do they call, wait, I blanked 10 seconds into the podcast. Chapter 6, The Bounty in Star Trek Picard. Bob, earlier this week, you asked me if I knew the name of this episode because you thought it might be a hint about something. And I said, no, I don't, but definitely tell me if it led to anything. Did it lead to something?
Well, of course, because in the closing credits, there's a device that everybody kept saying was a cloaking device. I don't know how they know that. And we knew there were a bunch of ships at the Starfleet Museum, and I think we figured we were going to the Starfleet Museum this episode because it's been well-publicized. Geordi's in it.
People on the internet caught like a schematic of a cloaking device in the credits?
Yeah, the closing credits have all those...
Yeah.
Have a million Easter eggs.
Yeah, I just wouldn't know. I mean, my Star Trek knowledge is way broader than knowing what the like mechanics of a cloaking device are.
So the Bounty is the name of the bird of prey that Kirk commandeered on the Genesis planet after the Enterprise was destroyed. They went back in time for the whale crisis. Mm-hmm. It has a cloaking device. It's at the museum. I figured this is amazing. It's a callback to Star Trek 4.
Pretty stinking good.
Yeah.
Were you sad that happy you figured it out, or sad that you figured it out? Or
no,
neutral?
I was very happy.
Okay.
I was very happy.
Well, let's get into the episode and do a watch through. So last time on Star Trek Picard was the famous, I'm calling it famous, it is a week old, Bob, the famous Ro Laren episode. She visits the Titan, interrogates the crew, drops some knowledge about how evolved changelings have infiltrated and to some extent, I guess, overtaken or completely overtaken Starfleet. And then she died a hero's death. The Titan turns and runs. And Jack, who's having these visions, admits to his mother that something is very wrong with him. Worf and Raffi, who I'm now calling Worfy because of a mistake I made last episode, defeated Kryn, a bad guy, Vulcan, not Klingon, and found a way onto Daystrom Station, which, as Kryn said, is guarded by a highly sophisticated AI system, but it has a few flaws that are most illogical. And he brokered for a device that exploits that system. And we knew that Frontier Day is coming up because Frontier Day is always coming up. So we pick up in space, which, as you know, is the final frontier. There is I had a hard time figuring out what the heck this device, speaking of me not knowing devices, was. It says at USS Titan, it's making pings. And I was like, is that a beacon? I don't understand it. And then a spaceship warps into the shot. Not for the last time this episode. Actually, 3 spaceships at this point. And that's about the moment where I realized this must be a decoy, because I thought the first time I watched that one of the ships was the Titan, but then I realized that they were people who were after the Titan. Does that make sense?
It does. One of the ships is named the Trumbull, after famous visual effects artist Douglas Trumbull, who died recently.
You sure it's not named after Trumbull County, Ohio?
I believe it's been confirmed it's named after Douglas Trumbull.
Okay, my bad. Go ahead.
There's also a ship, if you'll notice, there's the Excelsior II class. It's sort of the 25th century version of the great Excelsior class, which I really liked.
What's the Excelsior class from?
The Excelsior was first seen in Star Trek 3. Remember, Scotty was very skeptical of this new ship that was supposed to be much more advanced than the Constitution refit Enterprise.
Yes.
And went on, Sulu commanded it, and then the Excelsior class became incredibly famous in the world of Star Trek because it was one of the models that they had. So they used it over and over again in TNG and in Deep Space Nine.
They used it because they had it. That's great. Yeah.
They used it because they had it.
It's very much a Star Trek thing, is that it has been made historically on a budget, right? Like the Next Generation movies were using, at a certain point, uniforms from current TV. Their hallways are the same. They'd switch that stuff around. It's always been what would you call that? Thrifty?
I guess
way to use it at Paramount.
It's funny because they built all this stuff to make the motion picture. So they built the Refit Enterprise hallways and the bridge and the engineering room, with the great vertical intermix chamber and all that stuff. Then I remember watching Star Trek 6, and you see for a split second Scotty's in engineering and he's kind of smiling that the warp drive is working or something. And I sort of realized, wait a minute, that's the Enterprise D engineering set from TNG, which was on TV at the time. And I said, oh, well, I guess that makes sense because they're making TNG right now, so they just use those sets. But I guess I hadn't realized that they basically turned all the movie sets into the Enterprise D sets.
Yeah, I think so.
So it's just like those halls were basically in constant use from Star Trek the Motion Picture all the way through the end of Voyager, at least, I think.
Yeah, there's a visual language, and they just retrofit, maybe is the way to say it.
They added carpet for TNG and then they changed the carpet for the other show, but yeah, basically
lit it or shot it from slightly different angles, but it's all they had Star Trek parts and they sure used them. You know what? Can we do a rat hole inside of a rat hole? Is that allowed?
Sure, of course.
You called it Star Trek 6?
Yes.
I never think of Star Trek movies as numbers.
Interesting.
I had to look up. I would have called it The Undiscovered Country. I had to look it up to make sure that I knew what you were talking about, because I don't think of it in numbers. I don't know why, but I don't.
I think of the original series movies in numbers and in names because they were promoted as such. It's Star Trek V, The Final Frontier. But then when they went to Generations, I think that's when they dropped the numbers, correct?
Right. But I think they've added them. I think I may have seen a few years ago, because I bought all of them at some point, that they numbered all of the movies, and that the numbering, in my memory at least, I'll cut this out if I'm wrong, but my memory at least is that they started numbering. No, they continued numbering. So like the first Next Generation movie was Star Trek 7.
Generations. It may be on the side of the Blu-ray box set or something, but it's not on the title screen.
Okay, yeah. Like renumbering CS. We are in the 37th rat hole, and we are 13 seconds into this episode.
The line, The Witch in the Wardrobe?
That's it. They renumbered them to do it as chronologically, because he wrote something. C.S. Lewis wrote something in a letter to a little girl once or something. It's dumb.
Yeah, well, Rat Hole and a Rat Hole and a Rat Hole. Go
ahead.
The famous Lensman books, which was a sort of springboard for many space operas like Star Wars. I think there's 6 books, but the first 2 take place earlier and were written later, so I guess they were prequels. And I made the mistake of starting with those first 2, and I didn't find out till years later that I could have just started with 3, and I would have had a better time.
It's much more interesting to sometimes tell the story out of order, despite what we've talked about in previous episodes. We're contradicting ourselves. So all of these ships warp in. You are much better at identifying starships than I am. And I noticed just that I guess I notice things that are different, even if I don't understand how they're different. And I just sort of filed it away. I didn't write it down. And then it kept happening. And I thought, there's a visual leitmotif in this episode, which I guess I would call warping into frame. So multiple shots start in space. Maybe there's a planet or a space station or a sun or something in the background. And then a ship warps into frame. And I feel like I may be wrong about this. I just noticed it, but I feel like it's usually the other way around. We warp into a place, I don't know, from the point of view of the bridge. And then it wasn't, we'll talk about this a little later, but it actually comes into play later because I don't know, another chicken and egg thing. I don't know if they decided to do this and then came up with a clever idea, or they had the clever idea, but a little later they used this ship's warp into frame as a clever way to visually show where another ship is.
I think the first one they did this season was the great moment in episode 2 where the Titan saves the day, where Crusher's little mini ship is sort of about to get taken over, and the Titan just comes right in and breaks off the tractor beam.
So our next scene, our scene with actual people. So the next scene is Vadic on the Shrike, and she is smoking, and she is frustrated because they can't find the Titan. The last we saw of her, am I right that the last we saw of her was, she wasn't in the last episode, was she?
I think it was the end of episode 4 when they threw the asteroid.
Right. So they were repairing, and the Titan got away, and they are still looking for them. I maintain that she is clearly a changeling, talking to other changelings about the plight of their people. I don't know why some of the changelings are dressed up, but one of the Birdmen.
Or are they? Is that their face, or is that a
maybe,
mask?
I don't know. If a changeling didn't want to look like, say, a human, what would they look like? Like on Changeling Prime or whatever their planet is, are they just goo balls?
I don't know. I mean, they sort of look. They had that look, that sort of Odo waxy look at first, but I don't remember DS9 enough to say for sure. Yeah. I do like your idea that you thought that Vadic, is it, that she was a changeling because she was smoking?
Yes.
Because of Iman in the Undiscovered Country.
Oh, you mean Star Trek 6?
Yeah, Star Trek 6.
Thanks. So
yeah. But I believe Metalis has confirmed that they are changelings.
Well, there you go. I have a theory about that just sort of came to me like a bolt of lightning, but we will put that in the speculation segment, and I will, when the moments come to talk about that, I'll just say we'll talk about it later. It's called foreshadowing.
All right.
So the people who are in masks, for whatever reason, are they hiding them from the viewers so we don't know who they are or what? I think of them as Birdmen. Because that's kind of what they look like to me. And one of the Birdmen tries to talk. The
Birdmen of Changeling Prime?
That's correct. Tries to talk some sense into Vadic. And then she has the one Birdman kill the other Birdman because she wants vengeance. That's her word, not, reason. So this scene is about setting up where they're at. Also, if you have the big bad have somebody killed, you're showing that they're a really bad person and reminding the audience of that. And so she orders the bird people to, I'm going to quote here, I wrote this one down, gather the names and locations of every known associate of Jean-Luc Picard, all Starfleet colleagues past and present, every friend to whom he might turn, every loved one in which he might seek comfort. We will scorch the earth under which he stands, and the night will brighten with the ashes of the Federation, and from them we will rise. So this is sort of a planning scene like we've had before, which is part 1 of the plan is use someone Picard cares about as leverage. Number 2, end the Federation. And number 3, replace the Federation with whatever their changeling thing is. And I think that is also part of, we shouldn't talk about this in depth right now, but there's a leitmotif about family here. But often family is a positive. This one, there's a better place to talk about this, but to think about how family might, I don't know, hold you back, become a problem. Yeah. It's sort of a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
We'll talk about it later.
Okay, all right.
So we go to Beverly and
Thank God.
Picard in medical, and Jack has been diagnosed with orange brain spots, because you can see his orange brain spots on the TV. It's bad. It's Irumodic syndrome.
Now, is this the disease from All Good Things?
It is, in fact, that exact disease. So we have known about that since All Good Things in 1994 or whatever.
Yep.
And it makes sense, right? He's the kid. He passed it on genetically. Beverly links the Irumodic syndrome to Jack's hallucinations. Not sure that's accurate, but I could see why she would do that. Irumodic syndrome is just, it's a weird sort of plot device, Bob. It reminds me of an old Mr. Show sketch called about imminent death syndrome. And imminent death syndrome was just a thing where you could die at any moment, any time, because you had IDS, and it didn't, like, there was nothing, you could just die. It's sort of like this. She kind of poo-poos it, saying it could get him in a couple of years or decades, essentially. So it's bad, but maybe not so bad.
So it's basically like being alive.
Right. That's it. But there is something going on in the background.
You could die tomorrow or you could die in 100 years.
Yes, right. So she says to Picard, don't spend time burdening yourself when you can unburden him. And Picard's face lights up. It's a nice little moment because he gets to be dad-like. This lady who had hidden him for 20 years is saying, go take the opportunity to be a dad. From the storyteller narrative part of my brain, there's a real question about why you would give Jack Irumodic syndrome. Like, why do that unless it has something to do with the story? I think it could be innocuous. Maybe it's as simple as we needed a scene for these two boys to bond together. I think it might be bigger, and I'll have a lot to say about that in the speculation segment at the end.
And that's why Picard's eyes lit up, because it was another excuse
to head
go
over
to his favorite spot and get drunk.
Guinan's bar. Jack is drowning himself in bourbon, which has
good old barfly Picard.
That's right. I said last episode, I think I may have characterized Picard season 3's budget as something like astronomical, and you gently were like, maybe not. There's some question about that, and that sort of planted a seed in my head. And we like to chew the fat, making Guinan's bar jokes. They built the set and all of that. But once I started looking at it, I realized, well, we kind of covered this earlier in a roundabout way, which is how many sets they reuse. Guinan's bar is the most obvious example, but we're on the Titan. We didn't go to see the interior of the Intrepid, where Ro Laren came from last episode. We don't always, maybe is the way to say this, go to the interior of everything. Raffi and Worf hang out in that one
on the same planet
part of the ship that she's in.
Yeah.
Like with those red windows.
There's a scene later in this episode where they have to go to one of the ships at the Fleet Museum, and we don't see that.
Right. So they
just mention it.
Yeah, I'm not complaining, but I think you were right. If it's in your mind, you go, oh, well, they use the Titan a lot. They didn't build 3 spaceship sets. They built this one, and everybody's there, and that's fine. So here's Picard and Jack in the most conspicuous set in Guinan's bar, and he says, Jack, that is, says, for so long my mother taught me, my mother sought to protect me, or thought to protect me from you, to shield me from being collateral damage in the life of Jean-Luc Picard. The irony is, maybe I was doomed before I was even born. And he gets up and walks out of the bar. This is a good little tension-setting scene, I think. It resolves itself. I read something a million years ago by David Mamet. I think about it all the time when I try to analyze a scene, and it was about when a scene should end. And it's like when everything has been done, essentially. You don't, like, a scene doesn't last a second longer than it ought to last. And what they needed to do was get Jack mad at Picard and walk away. And that's the end of the scene. It hangs there with that tension in the air between those two and others for a while.
Does the hero get what he wants? And if not, what happens next?
And so the very end of the scene, which is kind of against what I just said, is that Seven calls Picard to say that they're here. We cut to Picard, Bev, Seven, and they're all in the transporter room. And who beams aboard? But, of course, Worfy. There's a big hug from Beverly, a good joke from Riker. Riker, comedy relief in this episode, Bob. I enjoyed it all. Again, my thing is that it really feels like Jonathan Frakes and Riker are having a lot of fun. And so to have him making those jokes or doing that Riker smile, those moments work for me. Raffi and Seven have a pregnant moment because they shipped him up for 12 seconds for no reason in previous seasons of Picard. I am glad it's over because it was pointless, but they did at least acknowledge it. Anyway, the Titan warps out of frame and a sun remains. So they're warping in and out of frame. That's a thing they're doing. It's a leitmotif.
Yeah. They're on the run.
That's it. Worfy, Picard, Ben, Seven, and Shaw in the. I'm going to screw this up. It's the room with the conference table. It's not the ready room.
It's not the ready room. This is
briefing?
probably the conference room, I would say.
Briefing room, yeah, whatever that one's called. This is. I was delighted to notice while I was watching it, a classic briefing room scene.
Yep.
Right. Worf does the exposition. So here's the recap of what we have all learned all together. He says, it appears our old enemy, the Changelings, have reemerged from the wake of the Dominion War. We knew that. During the war, they attacked the Federation with deception and might, and we retaliated with a Starfleet-made virus. There are scars and shame on both sides. Picard said, well, Starfleet did, however, deliver the cure to the Changeling homeworld to the Great Link, and Shaw said not without weaponizing a few zealots in the process. So the big move, according to Ro Laren from the Changelings, is coming on Frontier Day, which they say is now 48 hours away. There's a ticking clock. We know I love a ticking clock. I will just ask a question at this point, Bob, which is sort of the same question I asked about Jack. Why mention the virus unless it plays a part in the story? Did we need that sentence to say we retaliated with a Starfleet-made virus?
Or they're just doing the recapping. I assume all of that was at the end of DS9. I don't remember DS9 as well as I should.
I may have an answer for you. We'll talk about it again in the speculation segment at the end. So in other words, war, Bob. The Federation is crumbling under attacks from the ruthless Changelings and Vadic. There are heroes on both sides. Worf says,
hold up.
Evil is everywhere. And in a stunning
Heroes
move,
on both sides.
Vadic has swept the Titan and kidnapped. No, that's a Star Wars joke, Bob.
Heroes on both sides is definitely my favorite.
That's it. Their evil is everywhere. That's it. You want super relativism. Got it?
Mm-hmm.
So they again go over what we already know, but just to be clear, somebody stole something from Daystrom Station, including the portal weapon, but as Picard said, Ro believed the missing weapon would be central to the entire Changeling conspiracy. So the portal weapon is the distraction, and they've stole something. It's kind of a heist that they're building up to here, and Rafi basically says it's super dangerous and they only have one shot. And that they spent the last episode finding a way into Daystrom Station only means that they have an opportunity to go against this super smart AI. This is the first time, I believe, this episode that they refer to what they're looking for, which is the Project Manifest, which would show what has been stolen. There's a good comic relief. Riker shows up to say excellent use of the word burgle, Admiral, which got me chuckling. But they're also, and ultimately what I was super excited about was that they were setting up a classic away mission. This feels like Star Trek, Bob.
It does.
The next thing is a shot in space, which is exactly what I was talking about earlier. They cut to Daystrom Station, swoop to the left, pass a moon, and then the Titan warps into frame. And I thought, oh, that's a clever way to do this. Like they're showing where they are and then something comes in, but they're hidden. There's a moon between the space station, Daystrom Station, and the Titan.
Yeah, back on TNG, they probably would have just been on the bridge and someone would have said, Captain, we've entered the Daystrom system. We're in orbit or whatever.
Yeah, they have put a lot of money into the special effects budget. What they didn't build with hammers and nails, I think they definitely reserved for a lot of these sorts of effects.
And I don't think there's been any on-location filming, has there, this season?
Not that I'm aware of.
I think
This
it's
is all studio stuff.
I think it's all studio, yeah.
Yeah, and the on-location stuff was not. It was my least favorite part, I would say, of a lot of previous Picard.
I mean, there were many things to dislike.
It's true.
There's a lot of
everything feels like my least favorite part.
There's a lot of dislike to go around. Yeah.
Worfy and Seven and Riker are in the transporter room, and there's a little bit on the Titan bridge here next too. Rafi and Seven share a little bit more of a moment, but it's really to dispense with. They had a brief and pointless relationship than anything else. In other words, They broke up off screen, which is a thing I sometimes complain about. But it turns out if you just get rid of a thing I didn't like off screen, that's great. I'm
Totally
fine by
fine.
that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Totally
So
fine.
7 explains the rules that they warped close enough to beam them inside without alerting Starfleet, right? Because Starfleet runs Daystrom Station, just to be clear. According to Ensign Rose, she's not Ensign Rowe, but she's always Ensign Rowe to me. According to her intel,
According to Deadson Row.
ooh, burn or explode. I guess do you burn when you explode? I don't know.
Yeah.
So Rose Intel had a workaround for the transport inhibitors. Transport inhibitors are the unsung heroes of Picard.
I always remember transport inhibitor. There must be a better name for it than transport inhibitor. I remember distinctly seeing Star Trek 27
Okay.
Insurrection with our mutual friend Travis.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just laughing the entire time because in about a 5-minute span, they say transport inhibitor like 13 times.
I thought the old joke we used to tell ourselves, this is how cool we are, is that you had to reverse the polarity of the warp core drive.
Yeah.
Or something to that effect. Yeah.
That's it's funny that's basically that's really a Doctor Who reference, and I don't think we even knew that.
Oh, really?
Back then.
Huh.
Yeah.
I certainly didn't. I like that somebody in the room was like, hey, why don't they just transport out of there at basically every turn? And when they couldn't come up with a reason, they used transport inhibitors. Makes sense to me. You'd have those around. You don't want somebody showing up in your bedroom. You'd put transport inhibitors there, right?
Yeah.
So she says, this is 7 again, the Titan will have to get everybody in and out before the manual security patrol. And they have an hour at best to find, once again, the weapons manifest. I love, have I mentioned, a ticking clock. I love when they, often shows will say,
Clock and a clock.
yes, often shows will say, you have less than an hour. And I think, they're going to resolve that within this episode because this episode's about an hour long. Okay, that'll work.
Yeah.
Riker says, I hope this key works. Otherwise, we're going to have to resort to some old-fashioned Klingon offense. And Worf is having none of it. And he says, Captain Riker. And Riker says, Worf, call me Will. Come on. And Worf says, you should know that I now prefer pacifism to actual combat. And as they're beaming away, what does Riker say?
We're all going to die.
That's right. So, yeah, it's pretty good. They beam on, the key works, and they are in. So meanwhile, back on the Titan, Starfleet arrives, and Starfleet there's a lot of exposition about how the ships are way more powerful than the Titan. So the only thing they can do is run. Because remember, the Titan is a retrofit, so it's like a cool thing, but it's not the latest and greatest of Starfleet technology.
This is kind of a strange thing to me. I understand why you want the ship to be underpowered, so it's not like the Enterprise D when the Enterprise D was new, and it's the most powerful ship, and there's almost never an instance where it's underpowered, except maybe you're fighting the Borg or like multiple enemies at the same time. But why then would they name this the Constitution Class 3 vessel and then make it underpowered? Wouldn't you give that name to like the flagship of the Federation?
You'd think so. The Constitution class represented the best of the best, right? And now it's just
it's like a light cruiser or something. Yeah.
Right. So Picard calls Riker to explain that they'll leave. They have to leave, but he promises that they'll be back. And Ensign LaForge resists going to Athen Prime, I think it's pronounced, Athan. Could be Athen.
Athen Prime, maybe? Yeah.
Shaw gives the order, and the Titan warps away. It's just, Shaw doesn't have a ton to do in this episode, but it's neat when it comes down to it. He's still in the captain's chair.
Yeah.
Am I wrong about this? But has warping away often or always been the way to escape because you can't follow someone through a warp jump? Am I wrong about that? Am I mixing some science fiction franchise? I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what the history is. You would think it'd be difficult to track somebody once they jumped a warp.
Because that's what I was thinking, and my thought was they'll have to explain that. And they do. They will. I mean, recall that the very beginning of this episode was 3 starships coming up on what looks like a beacon pretending to be the Titan. conveniently
Yeah.
labeled the Titan. The next scene happens on Daystrom Station. You will recall that last episode, careful listeners will recall that I was confusing Daystrom Station, which I didn't know existed, with the Daystrom Institute, which is from season 1. Picard goes there in episode 1 to meet Agnes Girardi, and that's where he sees B4. We'll talk about that a little later because that comes into this episode.
I definitely assumed that it was all the same thing
Yeah.
when this series started.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, you know what I thought when they walked in was, gosh, it's very dark. And then I thought, I'm fine with that. This isn't a lived-in place.
This is definitely motivated.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know. I have no answer to this, but the latticed walls, sort of as they walk through the hallway, look very familiar. I cannot place them, but I would not be the least bit surprised if they are reused from some Star Trek thing that I have filed away somewhere.
They're probably reused from everything in Kurtzman Trek, definitely.
Could be, yeah.
So, Picard, Discovery, Strange, New Worlds.
Yep. So it is Daystrom Station, that is Section 31's secure storage facility, more or less. Section 31 being the sort of, I don't know, CIA of the Federation, I guess. So they're the clandestine ops people.
Yeah.
They played a part and may play a part in an upcoming show, but they certainly played a significant part in Discovery. Daystrom Station at this point is a menagerie of Easter eggs. The Menagerie is the name of a Star Trek episode, and I want you to know that I know my Star Trek because I'm cool.
Good job.
Thanks. The first thing Riker comes upon is a sort of a plant thing that I do not recognize, but I'll bet you people would if they paused and looked at it. We next see the Genesis device from Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan.
It says Genesis 2 device. I'm not exactly sure.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that's referring to. If it was a follow-up to the original Genesis device, or... there was one... Remember they said they used it in a cave first, and then they used it... Yeah, I don't know.
It's interesting. So maybe it's not, as I thought, that same Genesis device. Although I guess they would have destroyed it.
Blew up.
Yeah.
Yeah, it blew up and destroyed the Reliant. Right. So maybe they did a second. Yeah, maybe there was a second.
Could be
second version.
And then they walk past the corpse of James Tiberius Kirk, and I went, "Wait, what? They have Kirk's body?"
That is definitely strange. Yeah,
which is weird, but it's also a setup for later. I actually think it is. But it's very clear they got it off that Nexus planet from Tolian Soren. I did it.
Or maybe, I don't know, there are, I've seen some tweets from people who are hoping that, remember Shatner did his whole Shatnerverse novels in the Star Trek universe. Yeah. Do you remember anything about that?
I know they exist, and he was listed as an author at the very least.
None of the Star Trek novels, I guess, are really canon, but they sort of, the publisher kind of built up a continuity between the books, but these were always sort of off to the side.
Oh.
So this was not canon amongst the not canon.
Yeah.
But I think Kirk in the books had sort of an afterlife.
Good. Well, I wouldn't be opposed to Kirk having an afterlife. And I have said this on previous episodes. I continue to think it's true. I am naming all of these things because they're fun Easter eggs, but also because I assume that this is such a well-plotted season, that I assume that everything might actually be coming back again. I don't know that they're going to use a Genesis device or that Captain Kirk is going to show up. I'm not predicting it, but I would not. It's not out of the question at this point.
And this is what I said during the 50th anniversary of Star Trek. What was that?
2016, maybe? Yes, it was 2016.
Okay, so 2026 will be the 60th. We had the 50th anniversary of Doctor Who and Star Trek within a couple of years of each other, between 2013, 2016. Yeah. And it seemed insane to me at the time. Would you have a 50th anniversary of Doctor Who, and if the first Doctor were still alive, that he would not be in the 50th anniversary of Doctor Who?
That'd be wild.
Well, maybe it was bad timing because was 2016 before the whole Kurtzman era began?
I think so. That was split up at that point, was it not?
So was the only celebration of the 50th the Star Trek Beyond? Was that around the time?
I honestly am not sure.
Because it just seems a shame to me that Kirk wouldn't be involved in any way. The guy's still alive.
Right. And he has not retired, to the best of my
Yes.
knowledge. He's an active thinking human being.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know. I'm not bracing for Kirk, but I, at this point, would not be surprised.
There's a banner that like StarTrek.com or some official, or maybe Paramount Plus, put out some artwork celebrating, all the flavors of Star Trek, and it, all the way from TOS to all the brand new stuff. And Kirk is noticeably absent from that banner. It's, I think the people representing TOS are Nimoy and Nichelle Nichols.
Huh.
Interesting. Eh?
Yeah. I don't know what that means, but that's weird.
Yeah.
Well, the next thing we find out is that the trouble with Tribbles is that they scare Worf. Huh? How did I do there? Worf has no time for Riker's BS. Riker keeps joking, and they're kind of bickering. Worf is annoyed, and Rafi, maybe for the first time this season, plays the part of the moderate voice in the room, and she says, just let's retrieve the manifest. There's that thing again. Figure out whatever weapon was stolen and get the hell out of here alive.
Now, wait, can you explain the Tribble thing to me? Because the Tribble, when it attacks the window, is pretty gross looking.
Yeah.
Is that what Tribbles really look? I don't remember my Tribbles being like super monsters.
It's labeled as genetically modified. So
okay.
that may
okay.
be it. There was a short trek. Remember short treks? They came out with they were like a series of 3, 4, 5, 6, 10-minute or so things set in the Star Trek universe.
Yes.
If I'm going to be cynical, like designed to say don't cancel your Paramount Plus subscription. And if I'm just remembering this now, but I feel like there was one that told the story of how Tribbles intersected with Starfleet. But I don't remember if they were genetically modified or anything like that. But this very clearly says genetically modified. They weren't biting people with their 700 teeth like this one.
No, they were very cute, and that's how they got on the ship.
Who knows? Maybe I'll look that up and figure it out for another episode. It's at this point, though, that the sophisticated AI that the Vulcan was talking about, the bad guy last episode, generates a security response. We get that Terminator vision, Arnold Schwarzenegger looking through red. And the security response is they're walking around looking for a terminal to access the mainframe, and it says like security response generated or something. And that's the point at which a holographic crow appears. And Worf says, "Let us continue our search, but tread lightly. We will not be prey. We will be friendly energy." Riker says, "I don't understand the world anymore." And at this point, I basically think that Riker is a self-insert for Dave Tack, because it's basically his job so many points in this episode is to speak for viewers who are like, what? How is this?
What was the significance of the crow?
Riker says that Data dreamed of crows. So he starts with that. This Riker basically going like, what? That's not Worf. It's just a small bit of, I think, clever. They're hanging a lantern, as they say, on this pretty drastic change. I still have no idea what's up with Worf and why he changed. I'm a little worried that they don't have time to explain it, but I have a guess about what they might do. At this point now, music starts to blare, and Riker, this is actually nicely written for him. He hangs out in a bar and plays trombone doing jazz, and he identifies the note that they played. And it's at this point that Moriarty shows up, Bob. And I was 100% convinced last week that Lore was going to be the sophisticated AI who ran Daystrom. I almost texted you about that several times, and I thought, like, no, just let it go. Maybe he doesn't want to think about these things. But as I was like preparing the edit last week, I had convinced myself that, they keep talking about the sophisticated AI. That's how they'll bring Lore into this.
Yeah, I didn't know if I assumed it was Lore or Moriarty or a combination of those two. Because Moriarty could also be considered a sophisticated AI, couldn't he?
I think absolutely that's true. And I don't know if Moriarty's coming back or if this is the end of him. I had that theory that they would wind up on the Enterprise D and Moriarty would still be in the memory banks trapped.
Yeah.
Which seems less likely now, but could still work. And Moriarty says, "I think, therefore I am." I'm assuming that he's quoting himself, and then he pulls a gun on our friends. So now we're back on the Titan at Athen Prime. Did we decide to pronounce it?
Sure.
And it's the Fleet Museum that Geordi runs. We have known that since one of the first scenes in the first episode of the season, where Picard's taking down that painting that I think used to hang in his ready room.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And he says, send it to his buddy Geordi, who runs the Fleet Museum. So we've known for a long time.
And I think that we got an answer about what the space docks are that we're seeing. I think there's a line of dialogue there. It's hard to hear exactly what they're saying, but I believe we're meant to understand that what the Fleet Museum is actually the original space dock as seen in the Kirk era movies.
Oh,
that's what I
yeah,
think.
That
I
makes
think
sense.
there's a line right at the beginning where because then that explains why the space dock they go to in episode 1 of this season, how the Titan can go through the doors.
Right.
Because the Enterprise A could barely fit through those doors. It doesn't make sense that the Titan would be able to fit through them.
Okay. That makes sense. Thank you for your
That's what I
Starship
think.
knowledge.
Yes.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It's at this point that I wrote a leitmotif has appeared. It occurs to me that there's a lot of final resting places going on in this episode, like actual Kirk, and as we'll later learn, another starship captain, but also what is the Fleet Museum but a final resting place for ships.
Very true.
So they show up and they get hailed, and it is a furious Geordi LaForge with bright blue eyes. And he says, "Listen to me very carefully, Jean-Luc. Power down all of your ship's non-essential systems immediately." And this is the point where I'm like, huh? Because I think I will talk a little bit more about this later. But just to plant a seed here, Picard shows up and Geordi, instead of being happy, is angry. And I thought, why would Geordi be angry? And this is not the 17th time I feel like this season where I thought a character was going to zig and they zagged instead.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that they're wrong, but I'm a little confused. So Geordi and I think this is his real life, LeVar Burton's real life daughter, beam aboard. She's Alondra
Yes.
in the show. That confirms at least 2/3 of his children from the non-existent timeline from All Good Things, right? It's Sydney, Alondra, and I think there was a boy.
Yes.
Whose name I don't remember. They beam over, and Geordi says, "I must admit, in the nanosecond my body and then reconstructed, I debated the virtues of a curt professional handshake or an uncomfortable but long overdue hug." He hugs Beverly. He says hi to Sydney, his daughter, who was worried about going to this place. Beverly mostly just hugs in this episode. She doesn't have a ton to do. It's not the last hug she'll do. She's sort of emotional glue, and she has a line or two of asking questions, but she's not a strong part here.
She's a doctor and she's a mother.
It's true.
Yes.
She nurtures patients and has patience for kids.
Nice.
I don't
Nice.
know. Geordi says he's in the middle of his third memo to Starfleet objecting to gathering the entire fleet in one location for Frontier Day. Hey, somebody figured out it was a dumb idea. That's hanging a lantern on it again, I think. But I think there's an explanation for this, which is, well, if Starfleet has been taken over by the changelings, well, they're not listening to him because they want to gather all of the stuff there and then make it explode. So he's unhappy with Starfleet, and he's also unhappy that they showed up. He knows that there's something wrong, and they're basically bringing the fleet to him, and he's mad about it and walks away. There's a little scene where Alondra and Sydney, who are Geordi's kids, and Jack, who is Picard's kid, you could call them perhaps the next generation, Bob. I'll let that one linger. Thank you.
Nice.
They exchange some lines about dads. Jack and Sydney bond a little bit over having a tough time with their dads. Can I talk about Geordi LaForge's eyes and this weird thing?
Yes, please. Because I have a hot take on
Okay.
this.
So I 1,000,000,000% support the evolution of his eyesight, but I also miss the visor. Like, it makes total sense that they would construct some way that he didn't have to wear a visor at some point. I don't think that that's out of the question. I like that his eyes are now calling attention to themselves, which is interesting. They're bright blue and kind of pretty. But but to do that, you have to eliminate like the character's key visual feature, and that's kind of a bummer.
So I believe we are meant to understand that his eyes have some kind of advanced contact
for
lens
sure.
in. Yeah. So if you look at it, it's blue, but it's like technical.
Robot eyes in some way, shape, or form. I don't have a name for whatever this phenomenon is where I miss something that I don't need to miss. But I always think about Halo, the first Halo game on the original Xbox. One of the cool things it did is that there were no loading screens. You went seamlessly through, but it never loaded fast enough in a lot of areas. So it would just, the whole thing would freeze for 2 seconds while it loaded whatever was behind the door you just wanted to open. And so, at some point along the way, I kind of fell in love with the loading screen, even though you weren't supposed to. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like unintentional nostalgia
Yeah.
or unnecessary nostalgia.
Yep.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, you would figure that there'd be like a French name for that.
right, something.
Now, this may be a totally ridiculous idea. In fact, I know it's a totally ridiculous idea,
All
but
right, I'll just move on to the next thing.
part of me hopes that when the crew inevitably is taking command of the USS Enterprise D in the finale, that for some reason, like at a critical moment, like someone's going to hand Geordi the visor.
Oh, that
Someone's gonna do
I don't
that.
know what the point of that would be, but I'd like
Maybe
it.
this will help, Commodore. And he's like,
There you go. They have resurrected Kirk and put him on the. Oh my God! I have to stop.
I don't think that's going to happen,
No.
but yes, okay. All right.
So Picard and Geordi go to the briefing room, and Geordi says, "Leave it to you, Jean-Luc, to turn fatherhood into an intergalactic incident." I think that is a great line because it couldn't be more true. Picard wants Geordi to clone the Titan's transponder signal, and Geordi says that he can't. And Alondra, his daughter, takes over to explain that essentially the fleet is now networked, which means I didn't quite understand this, but the upshot, it may be like the Find My network, which is they talk to each other and can pinpoint locations.
Yeah.
And so you could drop all of the transponder signals that you want, she says, but the Titan itself is a beacon and you can't get around that.
Okay.
So we're back on Daystrom Station at this point, and Moriarty is firing live rounds at our friends. And Riker's comment about that is at least somebody's consistent. At least somebody's consistent because he can't work his way around Worf. But, you know, Moriarty just picked up where he left off. That Moriarty actor just chews every line of dialogue. I mean, he gets 11 and a half seconds of screen time, I feel like, and he uses all of them to be great.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine being that guy and like your
get a
agent?
call?
You know, he's like, hey, you want to be Moriarty for one half scene?
Wait, you mean the Moriarty from
30
1993?
Yeah,
Is his name Daniel Davis? Yep.
I don't
It
even
is
know.
in fact
Is that-
Daniel Davis, an Arkansas native. Arkansas, Holmes isn't from no. Moriarty isn't from Arkansas, Bob.
You know, he's got that great American guy, stuffy British accent.
Yeah.
Like he's a great. It's that great. Like it's almost like a mid-Atlantic accent, like a Cary Grant kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's great.
Yeah, I mean, talk about making the most of a limited opportunity. So they're running around the station. Riker keeps identifying the notes that are playing, and then they cut to young Riker. And my first response was, "Whoa, is this like old footage or de-aging, or did they do something?" And then it occurred to me, oh, this is straight out of the very first episode of The Next Generation, season 1, episode 1. called Encounter at Farpoint. It's the first meeting between Riker and Data, and they just cropped it because, but this is the beauty of shooting on film, is it not, Bob? They cropped it so that it's widescreen, but it looked like it was from yesterday.
It looked gorgeous.
Gorgeous.
It looked absolutely gorgeous. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, oh, that's exactly what I thought. Like, that is film. You can see the grain. All they had to do was just chop the bottom and top off, and it looks beautiful.
It really does. It was very warm, not just emotionally, but that's what the film looked like to me. There's that look, and it is from 1980, what, 6, 7, something like that.
I think 6 or 7.
It looks great sitting side by side. Also a lot brighter, I guess I should point out.
Yes.
As they were running around. But one of the reasons I thought, wait, is this doesn't, could this be from, did they reconstruct something and put a face on for a second, is because I thought, remember those, every time, at least at the beginning, when they weren't shooting on location, and this is pre-Beard Riker, and I was like, the early seasons of The Next Generation had the worst sets that they beamed down to. It was like they just put a couple of floodlights that were, I don't know, pink on a wall and put some potted plants everywhere, and he's running through a jungle. And I'm thinking like, oh, what is this? I don't, but
I think that was the introduction to the holodeck.
Yes.
Because Data's in the holodeck and Wesley's in there, and Wesley falls in and gets the captain's carpet wet. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. He does what?
Yep.
Okay. So Riker identifies the tune as Pop Goes the Weasel, which ties back into that first scene from the first episode of TNG. Riker solves the puzzle, essentially. And Moriarty says, marvelous, and dematerializes. Give him the Emmy for whatever that is. I'm a little confused, to be perfectly honest, why the idea was for them to solve a puzzle to be let into the room. I'm not sure. I don't know why that became the thing.
So when you get the Terminator vision, it brings up Riker.
Yes.
Right? Like, it identifies it's Riker, and it's funny. It's like a promotional image from like First really Contact or something. I don't know why it's that one. Though it is interesting because maybe that is as far as Data's memory of Riker would go.
Yeah, right. Because he just took the last 20 years off. I presume that the last memory that this version of Data has is from the lore brain transfer. Anyway, we'll see.
The B4 transfer.
Did I say lore?
Yeah.
Thank you for paying attention. I was testing you. I wasn't. Hey, Data's there. The door's open, and it's Data, and he has yellow eyes and white skin and white hair.
It's kind of white skin. It's not exactly.
Well, it's not yellow skin, I guess, is really what the pale skin is, maybe the way to say it.
It appears to be a very mild form of the Data makeup.
Yep. And I guess we were both right to having speculated, not in the way that we thought, but they definitely brought Data back. And I am not the least bit sad about that. And we'll talk about it in a minute, but they hang every lantern they've got on it.
So they did a clever thing, which was they wanted to put things in the trailer so that people like you and me would get excited to watch again. So they wanted to have Moriarty. And then they specifically, and they knew that Brent Spiner would be doing interviews. He would be in artwork. There would be screen grabs of Brent Spiner. There would be, he would be making comments that, yes, I'm in season 3 of Picard. And so in the trailer, the only time you see Brent Spiner is, and then I think it's Geordi. The sense you get is, Brent Spiner walks into the shot and Geordi goes, lore. Mm-hmm. So they definitely made you think, well, maybe Data's going to be in it, but it's probably just lore.
That's pretty good.
Yep.
Yeah, that's good. I give them credit for that, even though I didn't watch the thing. It's like they're faking you out. Mm-hmm. We go back to the Titan in the next scene, and Geordi and Picard are talking. Geordi wants to help, but he says the best case scenario, I'll be court-martialed. Worst case, a compromised Starfleet will come after my family. You know that. Picard says it's a matter of life and death, and Geordi's answer is, it's always life or death, Jean-Luc. When has it not been? Which, accurate, right? He said, which was fine back in the day when I chose to put my life on the line under your command, but you've just knowingly put my daughter in grave danger, and that is some major league BS. I don't think, first of all, that's obviously not true. Second, I don't think Geordi's dumb enough to say that, even if that's what they want me to believe. I think that this is a pretty classic example of what I've talked about before. It's the Jake Skywalker problem, as I termed it, where it's like, I know this guy, and then I was never supposed to see him again, and then he shows back up acting like somebody who is not this guy. It weirds me out. They came up with an explanation, but I'm telling you, like, this is my least favorite part, I think, of any episode I have watched, because it feels way more to me like Geordi LaForge is acting in the way that the script says he must act to create drama, rather than acting like Geordi LaForge. If you came to my house and said, Dave, I need help, it's a matter of life and death, I'd say, tough crap? No. But I'm supposed to believe Geordi LaForge would do that to... Come on.
Well, and this is what I've been doing. Before we fired up the microphones, I sent you a link to my first attempt at a fan edit of this series.
Yeah, buddy. Is there some place on the internet where that could live and not be destroyed?
I'll figure it out.
I'm going to link that, if you can figure it out, in the show notes, everybody.
Or at some point in the coming weeks.
Yeah, okay.
But what I did was I condensed the first 4 episodes because everyone is saying that that's sort of the first, like, if this whole 10 episodes is like the last great TNG film, the first 4 are basically the first act of that film.
Yes.
So that's the first thing I did. I made one video of the first 4 episodes. I cut it down to about an hour 40, an hour 50. Mm-hmm. So I basically cut about half of the material out, and I think it still works.
Excellent.
But this is one of those scenes that would be the first one to go from my fan edit. Like, this is just one of these things that when you're taking a story that has, an A and a, you're starting at the beginning and you're going to the end, but we have to break it up into 10 somewhat interesting chunks. So we need some kind of emotional conflict or emotional framework for each episode that you might not normally need. And like you said, it's just an equation. Like, well, okay, we need Geordi to disagree and be upset about this to get from the beginning of this scene to the end of this scene. But you're right, it doesn't make much sense.
No, I do not see Geordi LaForge doing that. It's not impossible. It's not totally out of the question, but it is surpassingly unlikely. And it is a move they had pulled so many times before. Even if it is consistent with the themes of the show, it still seems inconsistent to me with the themes of being a person on the show, particularly Geordi LaForge at this point. So yeah, I had a sour taste in my mouth. There's a lot that I love about this show, and I have been overwhelmingly positive. This I thought was right up to the line of garbage. However, I will say they mend this pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But they said drama requires tension, and thus what can Geordi's tension be?
Yeah.
We have Bob, maybe I should just sit back at this point, because now we are on the Titans Bridge with Jack and Seven, and it's another menagerie. A menage
a ship.
There you go. And we are here doing this sort of thing way earlier than I expected we were going to be in this season.
Yes, I started seeing hints of this on Twitter early in the day. I had to go into the office for my day job. And I couldn't help but fire up Paramount Plus at one point and skip directly to this. I just sort of, how when you can skim along the sort of progress player bar and it gives you little thumbnails, and I waited until we got there, and I skipped directly to this scene with Jack and Seven browsing the Fleet Museum's contents.
So, you want to take a tour of the ships at the museum, Bob?
Yes, I would.
Okay, Seven, I almost called her 9, but that's not how that works. 7 is pressing a button and changing the view screen, and we're hopping around from ship to ship. Ship number 1 is the Defiant. And then this is where you say something about the Defiant.
The Defiant was the hero ship of sorts from Deep Space Nine. What they fought, I think they introduced that. Very interestingly, about the beginning of season 3, they decided that they needed sort of a small mobile warship to be assigned to the space station. Kind of like when at the beginning of season 3 of Babylon 5, they got the White Star.
That was just like when they got the White Star on Babylon 5.
That's right, exactly. Now, apparently, I my memory of DS9's hazy. I want to say they replaced the Defiant at one point. Maybe it was destroyed. I know. Remember that's how they very cleverly got Worf on the ship for.
I was going to say that. Yeah.
For first contact. Yeah.
They were fighting and Warp came in. Sure.
So we have the Defiant. The second one was what?
The USS New Jersey, which was new to me.
Yes.
And do you know what the speculation on this is? Because I looked it up.
I do. So first thing I did, like probably most of us did, I went straight to Franz Joseph's Starfleet Technical Manual from the mid-'70s.
Oh, right.
And I looked at the list of the Constitution starships. Now, I believe Kirk said at one point in the series, sort of famously, there are only 12 like her in the fleet. So there were 12 Constitution classes, and they're pretty well documented. And then in Franz Joseph's Technical Manual, which is sort of not exactly canon, but much of it has been canonized, there's a giant list of additional Constitution class vessels that he speculates that were built. None of them were named the New Jersey.
Well, this one is, and it's canon now, baby.
Yep, it is. And I assume it's...
a reference?
What did you find on Twitter about this?
Well, I found it somewhere else, but I'm sorry I didn't write it down. Credit to the place that I didn't credit. My bad. It's the USS New Jersey. It's what are the numbers and letters? Not call sign.
I think it's NCC 1975. I think
correct. Terry Metalis was born in New Jersey in 1975.
In 1975,
the showrunner.
Yep.
Not the worst thing in the world to give him, honestly.
Now, the other thing that I like about this is it is the real Constitution 1 class vessel. It is not
modernized in any way.
It's not the Discovery version. It's not the Strange New World version. Yes, so that gives me hope.
I think the point of this ship is to say they have one of these if they ever want to use it for anything.
Yeah.
Like this is not a show about Star Trek Strange New Worlds, although we have talked about it before, but they modernized the Enterprise A for Strange New Worlds in a way that I think was good and respectful. I simply don't think any modern television show could walk onto the set, for example, and the interior of the Enterprise from the original series and credibly interact with that in 2023.
Yeah, I mean, well, which is why I would say just don't do that then. Like, there's no point in constantly going backwards in Star Trek. It's all about going forwards.
Fair enough. But I strongly, I mean, I'm just inventing this, but my suspicion was they have canonically updated the Enterprise A, and there's nothing they can do about that at this point. However, they can create the USS New Jersey, which is essentially a carbon copy of the Enterprise A with different letters and numbers painted on it.
And we've talked about this before. There is speculation that everything since the J.J. Abrams movie has existed under a separate license that requires that things be a certain percentage different from what they were before 2009. I have no idea if that's true.
Yeah, or if it remains true since the reunification of Paramount and CBS.
Yeah, but in my own headcanon, seeing that gives me the sense that I've had this entire season, which is this is basically happening 20 years after Nemesis, and nothing else we've seen is in this same universe. Yeah. Picard season 1, 2, Discovery, Strange New Worlds are in that J.J. Abrams universe or in some third parallel universe.
But this actually is the one that picks up from the universe you know.
Exactly.
Well, the next one, Bob, is the Enterprise A.
That's my favorite vessel. This is the refit Constitution class, perhaps now called the Constitution 2, the one Andrew Probert designed for Star Trek the Motion Picture, as you know.
A drinking game now. Drink Andrew Probert.
Yes, Andrew Probert is a master. We've talked about this. I am always bothering you with my ideas, my pitches for new Star Trek series.
You always are.
And my series was going to be the hero ship, at least at the beginning, was going to be the Enterprise A, because we never had a canonical explanation of what happened to it. We just saw it fly off into the sunset. So my series would have theorized that it was, maintained somewhere.
When did we last see the A?
We last saw the A flying into the sunset in The Undiscovered Country.
There you go. Oh man. And then they signed Space.
That's right.
That's a good movie. We'll do that one at some point.
Going back to the New Jersey, interestingly, that is probably telegraphed a little bit in TNG itself, the episode where Scotty shows up via transporter accident. Do you remember that episode at all? Relics, where they find the Dyson sphere?
I think you may have said the original series, but what you meant was not the original series.
Yes, sorry. I meant TNG.
But you did what you said was correct, but confusing.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Scotty gets drunk and he goes to the holodeck.
What?
And that's like the one person who's got drunk in TNG.
There you go.
Other than the Space Irish.
What?
Do you remember? Do you remember the episode from series 2, season 2? I love season 2. And there's the one episode everybody says
where
it's
everybody
racist.
all the girls get horny. That one?
No. It's everyone says it's racist because they're the Space Irish, but it's they're these two civilizations that are both dying, and one is this like super advanced, snotty sort of like waspy civilization, and the other one is a group of like dirty Space Irish who are always drinking and like having chickens run around. You don't remember this one?
Not a single bell.
You have to watch this episode, Dave. It is delightful. It's called Up the Long Ladder.
Up the Long Ladder.
Please watch this tonight.
Irish
You will thank
episode.
me.
All right.
You will thank me. Riker.
Okay.
Riker. Maybe we do a special separate pod just on that one because Riker makes the moves on the sassy Irish lady. Wow. I believe he has to wash her feet or something. It's a little kinky.
Okay.
But I don't know how we got on that one, but when Scotty's
drinking.
on,
it was the
Scotty's drinking.
I'm looking at screenshots. Absolutely, I know this one. Yes,
it's so good, dude. It's a great episode. It's a great episode. It's great. Yes, exactly. The Space Irish. So Scotty goes drunkenly to the holodeck and he goes, "Show me the Enterprise. No bloody ABD.
Right.
Whatever. I'm pretty sure I just got my ABCs wrong.
You did.
I did.
Oh, that's standing. Don't worry.
Scotty goes so the holodeck doors open and Scotty's on the bridge of the Constitution class from the series. So it's not the modernized, like, the motion picture era. It's the 1960s. And he's sitting there just drinking and reminiscing. And Picard comes in and he says, "Constitution class, there's one of these in the Fleet Museum. But of course, this is your Enterprise."
There you go.
So they already, told us that they had a Constitution in the Fleet Museum.
It's good. They kept one around.
Now, the next, the one after the A, was that when we see the Voyager?
It is, in fact, the USS Voyager.
And I do not want to be one of these people, one of these horrible, terrible people who go on Twitter and, I was crying my eyes out at this. And basically anything happens like, Poe says they fly now. And it really brought a tear to my eye. Like, I hate that. But I did get a little choked up at that moment, and I don't like Voyager. I think Voyager is basically just I never enjoyed Voyager. I thought by then they had long run out of steam. The characters were mostly bland. The stories were generally bad. But I suddenly became nostalgic for Voyager, and I just thought it was a really touching moment. How it really, I don't know, like the character and the actor together and the viewers, both in universe and in reality, there's so much sort of feeling there, right?
Yeah, there was a genuine moment there because the other stuff was just, you want to talk about inserting a character in place of the audience. That's Jack in this, right? The guy who doesn't, as Seven says, the guy who doesn't care about being in Starfleet or care about Starfleet likes the hot rods of Starfleet, basically.
Yeah.
And when we get, so they're just geeking out. They didn't cast Barclay for this scene. God, what if Barclay shows up, Bob? Anyway, they didn't cast Barclay for I wouldn't be surprised about
the doors
anything.
will open on the Bridge of the Galaxy class, and Barclay will be like, "I've been waiting for you."
They brought back Moriarty. Why not? Why not at this point, right? So the Seven says now Seven's looking at Voyager, and she is from that television series. She doesn't know she's from the television series, Bob, but we do.
Yeah.
And she says she, as in Voyager, because ships are ladies, made her name farther out than any of those other relics had ever gone. I was reborn there. She was my home. Her crew were my family. I would say her crew was my family, but there's another way to do it. She says, and now Jack says, you're just trying to find another, as in family. And there we go. Found families, finding families on star cruisers. Are they called star cruisers, or is that just a name I'm taking from somewhere else? Starships. That's it.
So before we go on to things that that are super important, like themes, can we please get back to the starships for 1 second here?
Oh my God, yes. I'm so sorry.
I have a list now of some of the other ships we can see, and I will go through them quickly for you. Okay. So, as we have said, we have the Enterprise.
Wait, you can see where? Like in shots or things they could bring?
Yeah, well, people have pieced together various ships that are there.
Oh, okay.
From various special effects shots and things people have said on Twitter and shared. So, okay. We have the Enterprise A, which was given to Kirk at the end of Star Trek IV. We have a Klingon bird of prey, the Bounty, which we will talk more about. Star Trek 3 and 4. We have a Klingon Katinga class battlecruiser, which is the ones we see at the beginning of the motion picture, taking on V'ger.
Oh, God, that's a great.
And then we've seen them many times since. That was basically an updated version of the Klingon cruiser from the original series, just like they did to the Enterprise in the same movie. This one's cool, that an NX-01 refit. So if you remember in the Scott Bakula series, the Enterprise doesn't really have a secondary hull, the part below the saucer, but some of the special effects guys always, I think Doug Drexler, always, if the series had continued beyond season, 3 or 4, he wanted to do a refit to add the secondary hull so that it looked a little bit more like an earlier version of the Constitution class. And that's what's there. It's like the refit version of
pretty cool.
Archer's Enterprise. We have a Miranda class, which is the class just like the Excelsior that we saw over and over again in TNG and Deep Space Nine. It is the class that the Reliant was from Star Trek II. Looks like a TMP refit Constitution, just with the nacelles going under. We have a Nebula class, which is to the Galaxy class what the Miranda was to the Constitution class. So it's basically like the Enterprise D, but it doesn't. But the nacelles go under rather than go up.
Okay.
Yeah. We have the Voyager. We have I believe, the USS Excelsior.
Sulu's ship?
It's an Excelsior class, but I believe it is the original USS Excelsior. We have several Akira classes, which were a fan favorite from the fleet at the beginning of First Contact, when the Battle of Sector 001, where the fleet assembles to take on the Borg cube that's trying to assimilate Earth. And ILM made a bunch of new starship classes, and this is that class. This is one of those. We have the original Constitution class, the USS New Jersey, Constellation class. It may even be the original the Stargazer itself. Picard and Jack Crusher's ship.
The Elder.
It looks like the Miranda and the TMP era Constitution, but it has 4 nacelles instead of 2. We have an empty berth where the Titan hides out. Mm-hmm. We have a Romulan bird of prey, which was always confusing to me as a kid. Like, why was that ship called the Klingon bird of prey, but there's also Romulan bird of preys? I think that's from the original series era. We have a Defiant we mentioned, and then a Saber class. I'm not sure what that is, but yep. So there you go.
Pretty cool.
Those are all our ships.
My guess is we will see more of them, not just parked. At least that's my hope.
And the Enterprise E and possibly F are still out there.
Somewhere.
Yep,
all right.
Yep.
We'll see. At this point, I wanted to talk about the leitmotif, because remember, this is a show obsessed with family. We've talked about this several times, but the themes of both biological families and found families, I think, are as important to Picard season 3 as anything else. And so it's not just, this is again an example of, I think, clever writing, which is they could come up with a scene where Seven looks at Voyager and just looks longingly and doesn't say anything, but they make it about family in a show that is, as much as anything else, about family. They tie it in. They're being smart. In some ways, their laser focus on themes makes for clever things. In other ways, like I was talking about earlier with Geordi, it doesn't work so well. The way maybe to better explain that is, this seems like something that Seven would do in the moment, and it did not seem like something that Geordi would have done in his moment.
Yeah.
So the next and final ship we look at is the HMS Bounty, which is a Klingon bird of prey from The Search for Spock. That is a movie, a motion picture as they called them, from the early 1980s. Again, another fun way to make the scene more than fan service. They tie it into the story. And they give the backstory of what happened to the ship. You want to talk about where this wound up, how they used it and where it wound up, and then tie it back into here?
Well, so correct me here. The Klingon bird of prey it goes to the Genesis planet. Christopher Lloyd's a captain. Kirk gets it after the Enterprise blows up. They take it to Vulcan. They decide to go back to Earth to stand trial. They name it the Bounty. Then they have to go back in time and save the whales, and then it crashes in San Francisco Harbor Bay, correct?
Right. The scene that blew my mind when I was a kid, I saw this in the theater, and I did not see a lot of movies.
The Southern Park Mall, yes?
I feel like you were at the movies 6 or 7 times a week because you lived close to a theater, and my parents were not what I would call moviegoers, but I did see The Search for Spock. And the scene that blew my mind when I saw it was when they cloaked and parked it in the middle of a park in San Francisco. And there was an effect shot of like the invisible ship having pushed down the grass. And and a comedy shot of like a jogger with a headband on, which makes me now think of Spock. But like a comedy shot of a jogger just running headfirst into the thing. And the idea was like you said, at the end, they crashed and
then it sank, I guess, which is funny because every time I watch Star Trek 4, I get very anxious because the
Star Trek 4,
they leave the Voyage Home.
Thanks.
They leave the hatch open in the ocean, and there's just water. I'm like, that ship is going to sink.
It bothers you?
It does. I'm like, close the hatch. You guys have a Klingon bird of prey. It's going to sink, and that's exactly what happened, right? Isn't that what they said?
That's what they say. It sank to the bottom of San Francisco Bay.
And the cloak went on.
Just hand wave over that, and nobody saw.
Yeah. Well, it makes total sense because it's been scaring me for 30 years. Good.
Well, I'm glad you can sleep easy tonight for the first time in decades.
They finally found it.
Yeah. So the 7 says, story goes, they had a hell of a time finding it. It disappeared because the cloaking device had reactivated it. Clever way to tidy up that story, Bob, after many years. Now we return to Daystrom Station, and again, clever writing that I enjoy. Rafi says, I thought Data died twice. And Riker says he did. This situation, let's just be clear about this. They walk into a room with Data, who has died twice in Star Trek canon. It is absurd no matter how much you like it. And I love and admire the writers for just getting a dozen lanterns out of the closet and hanging them all over it, because there's just no way.
Yeah.
There's no way to straight face. I mean, there is, I guess, a way to straight face it, but I appreciate the, you know what, just never mind about that. They wouldn't, listen, if they hadn't friggin' killed him at the end of season 1, they wouldn't have to explain this, because then it would just be in your preferred timeline, a straight line from when Data died to the beginning of Picard season 3.
Yeah, because when he died in the movies, it was clearly meant like a Star Trek 2 thing, and he implanted his memories in the other copy, and everybody assumed, and in fact they
were leaving it open.
Yeah, and if you remember when the first J.J. Abrams movie came out, they went to great lengths to tie it to this Prime universe, and they did a whole comic series about the events after Nemesis, and I think at the time, Picard was an ambassador and Data was the captain of the Enterprise E.
I remember reading it on my phone, but I remember exactly nothing about it. I just remember that I could read it on my phone at the time, and that blew my mind. Riker says that Data copied everything he was onto B4, and he's looking at B4's head that's sitting next to pale, chubby Data. He says his memory, personality, his mind, and up till now, it's been unrecoverable. But since the ban on synths has been lifted, nothing's impossible. Again, hand wavy, the ban on synths is a reference to the terrible Picard season 1. And it is also, in about 4.5 sentences, a systematic dismantling of the absurdity of Picard season 1, and I love it. It reminds me so much of Luke in Rise of Skywalker utterly dismantling the Luke of The Last Jedi, which is like, never mind, forget it.
Yeah, and it's funny. I am so dumb that even part of my brain did that logic, which was, well, wait a minute. they just made a whole song and a dance about Data dying in the first season, so they can't really bring Data back.
What
And
if we just said,
I
never
knew,
mind?
Yeah, just it's fine.
Yep. So I watched Nemesis a few weeks ago at this point. I mentioned it on a
Interesting.
previous episode, and I remember saying I don't know why I watched it, but I know exactly why I watched it. Did you ever do that thing where you don't realize you said a thing that just makes no sense to you and it came out of your mouth? I watched it because we were talking on the podcast about maybe they'll bring Data back, and I don't have a very clear understanding. Well, I have a vague and I want a specific understanding of where he was. So you'll recall, because you love Nemesis so much, that it opened with Riker and Troy's wedding, and Data sang the song Blue Skies during the wedding. So there's not a ton to say about Data's death in Nemesis, except that it was, heroic. He saved the day. He saved everybody on the Enterprise. And the movie ended kind of on not kind of, straight up on a huge bummer because of his loss. But before his sacrifice, Data copied his, I guess we'll say, brain into B4. So at the beginning of Nemesis, the bad guys lure the Enterprise because they pick up a positronic signal, and what they find is a Data-looking android, heretofore undiscovered, and it was called B4, as in before. It's not subtle. And at the end of the movie, right before his sacrifice, Data copies his brain onto B4, who is so much less capable than Data, he's basically childlike. And at the end of the movie, after Data has died, there's a scene where Picard does his best to explain what happened to Data, to B4. And it doesn't take, but B4 sings Blue Skies,
Never saw the sun.
which was there is some of Data left behind. There's hope, right?
Yeah.
And that was it. That's all we knew about Data until Picard season 1, which, I don't need to talk about that anymore.
Please don't.
I also watched, however, because I have to talk about it right after saying I
no.
didn't. I also watched the Agnes Girardi scene from season 1, episode 1 of Star Trek Picard, because that is where B4 comes back. It's the only other time that we have seen B4,
He was just
in
sort of
film.
in a drawer, right?
He's literally straight up parts sitting in a drawer. I have no idea why. He was assembled and moving before. Well, I do know why. Never mind. I take that back, because remember, there was a synth ban.
They just turned him off and took him apart.
Took him apart and put him in a drawer at the Daystrom Institute in, I think, South Korea, or I think it's there. Doesn't really matter. Picard goes there, and that's where he first meets Girardi, who becomes a main character eventually. And she explains to him that B4's positronic network. So that's the name they give for the sophisticated computer that makes him like a person. Is that a fair?
Yeah, it's his brain,
Basically,
I guess, right?
She says B4's positronic network isn't nearly as sophisticated as Data's, which is why he was childlike. But Data copied his, quote, memory engrams to B4. But essentially, like, the upshot of the scene is, there was nothing we could do. He's not as sophisticated. It didn't work. And then they proceed from that premise all the way through season 1. And what season 3 presupposes is, never mind. And that is fine
Good.
with me.
Yes, it's fine.
However, there is some interesting stuff. So what we have figured out at this point is that at some point between that first episode of Picard season 1 and this episode, Soong, the Altan, A-L-T-A-N, Altan Soong, all Soongs are brilliant scientists, and they often create robots, or always create robots, and also they look exactly the same. I don't know canonically if they're like cloned or something.
Well, it's only 2 of them, right? There's just
There's
so
Noonien
there's
Soong,
Data's.
who's the original
Well,
one.
it gets very confusing because those names are used in relation to Khan too, and I don't know. It's Khan Noonien Soong, but I don't understand how that's connected. But there's Data's dad, who wasn't. There's Data's dad, who was an old man in
Right.
TNG,
Played by Brent Spiner.
and then there's this guy who's supposed to be, also played by Brent Spiner. And then the guy now, is that supposed to be his son?
I don't know how
Son or
far
great-
away, yeah. But
son or
he
grandson.
was at the end of Picard season 1. We learned in Picard season 1 that he basically lived on a planet with androids who were more sophisticated than Data and were. So at some point between the beginning of Picard season 1 and this episode, that Soong, Alton Soong, got B4. Then Soong died and somebody moved B4. I don't know how important that is, but at least I can follow the progression. So they play a video of Alton Soong from who was again from Picard season 1, and he said, "Before I gifted Picard my Golem, in case you don't know, the Golem is the body into which they transferred Picard's consciousness, very much like Data tried to do into B4. So, before I gifted Picard my Golem, my intention was to live beyond my years, to become my own legacy. Now I see in my final days, that wasn't just poor humanity, it was poor science, because evolution is not an act of preservation, it's addition." And if that isn't about this show, honestly, like thematically, about evolution, copying the old people becoming their own legacy, I don't know what is. It's they're talking about on a different level, I think, how they thought about the show and how they made the show and sequels and all of that. It's all built in to that statement to me.
Yeah. Definitely.
And they cut to now Geordi talking to Picard, and he says Sydney, his daughter Sydney, she was the hard one, just stubborn. In truth, she probably got it from me. You always want to impart the best aspects of yourself to them, kids. I will replace. You always want to impart the best aspects of yourself to the next generation. You get it? And Picard says, I've recently been reminded that we are not in control of what we pass on. Strengths, wisdom, talent, and also flaws, weaknesses, sins of our past. Again, it's about the show. It's also about family, again, because that is maybe more than anything what this season is all about. And then Soong continues to, he explains, and then then they cut back to Soong, who explains the new Data. He says, into this new Golem will go a bit of Lal B4, of lore, and of course, a great deal of Data. This time with the wisdom and true human aesthetic of age, with the hope that in totality, someone will rise to be the best of us. So they aged Data with a Golem like Picard got, and I actually think that's pretty good. I feel like Brent Spiner used to, in the days when this was never going to happen and Nemesis was going to be the end, I feel like Brent Spiner used to get asked, or used to say he was too old to play Data. And this is a pretty clever way around that because it totally circumvents it. And it takes something that I didn't like about season 1 and makes it interesting in season 3.
Yes, all of that makes sense. But the other thing that I was surprised at is there are moments in the series where they explain Data does age. So, and I had forgotten that too. And I just always assumed, we were never going to get Data, or he would be, computer graphics or something. So, but really, if you look at the old series, it wasn't really even that much of a stumble. I mean, I guess you could say, well, okay.
Well, there's so much of a difference maybe now.
Yeah. I mean, you could say like, yes, okay, maybe they said a line or two that Data ages, but nobody wants to see old Data maybe, So I think we all assumed that we weren't really going to get much Data ever again.
And now I think we probably will.
Yeah.
How about Lal as a call out here? Lal, Lal?
Yeah, that's interesting.
I didn't see Lal around, but I also didn't expect him to call that out. I don't know. You remember Lal from an episode called The Offspring? I looked it up just to make sure, but it was the story was that Data just randomly created another android.
Yeah.
And she looked like a hideous monster at the beginning and decided that she wanted to be a human woman, and she walked around for an episode with a very, I think, 90s bob haircut. And mostly what I remember from the episode is old style Picard being furious at Data for just cavalierly bringing in bringing life just because he could or whatever. And she effectively died by the end of the episode. But how in the world Soong got Lol, I don't know. But it's at the very least a nice call back to old stuff.
Well, I mean, and that makes total sense. I mean, Data is a marvel of technology, and I would assume on the Enterprise D he stored her, positronic brain,
sure,
or
right,
whatever. What I was curious about is I don't remember. Can you remind me what was the last time we saw Lore?
That's a good question.
Do you have any idea? Was it the end of season
that 2-parter?
And like I said, I
feel like they must have
like,
had
was
something in the. Hold on, I'm looking at Wikipedia. Lore was last seen, according to TrekMovie.com, Bob. Lore was last seen in the 2-part TNG episode Descent. So that was the one of several attempts to recreate the excitement of Picard turning into a Borg.
Yeah, was that so? And I don't remember. Was Lore destroyed? Did he escape? I guess those were the only two options. Was
Data,
captured
I think
or something?
Data, I think deactivated him. I think he just shuts him off.
Oh, okay.
So he's around somewhere, I guess. So Soong could have gotten Lore because he was deactivated somewhere, and
Lore and B4 and Lol.
Yeah. It's neat. It seems like the right combination of. I think they got everything there to include.
Did they say in this episode what this golem is called?
No.
I mean, everyone's kind of referring to him as Data, but it's clear that it's more than just Data, right?
Yep. I mean, look, the turd story of Picard becoming an android is now Data's story, where it works, I think, way better. And because Data's whole thing forever, even in that scene where he dies, was one of the few things that I thought was nice about season 1, is that it was crappy to get up to there, but it was a very nice sort of death scene at the end of season 1. You cried your butterfly tears, I remember. That's a Red Letter Media drink reference. Data's defining quality is that he longed to be more human, and Data at the forefront, all Soong stuff at the forefront, is kind of exactly what he always wanted. Not perfectly, but if Picard's human, then a Data version of a golem, I think, would also be human. I think it works, again, way better for Data's very long character arc. And also, it denudes Data's season 1 death, which I am, again, perfectly happy to do.
Good, done, like it.
So anyway, Soong died, and Lol and B4 and Lore and Data are all inside the golem. We return now, Bob, to the Titan, where Geordi and Picard are talking. Geordi says, I think back on those days on the Enterprise, all the danger we rushed into, I never feared for my life, not the way I feel for hers, meaning his daughter. Jean-Luc, I want to help you, but I can't help you and protect them. Can't do both. I'm sorry, I really am. Again, Geordi not helping is bullshit. It just is. You came to my door, one of my oldest friends, and asked for help, and I'd say, I got a kid, though. Nah. This is, I guess, though, I have to say, the reason that it's BS is because it doesn't seem true to the character. However, it's way too true to the theme, which is paralyzed parents. How many times have we seen this thing replay itself? And the problem I have at this point is that, like, the cumulative effect of characters acting in sort of seemingly ridiculous ways to me is starting to become slightly annoying. Like, Picard shows up on Geordi's doorstep, as I said, to say, I need your help. And he says, go pound salt. That's absurd. It's good drama, but it's an absurd position for Geordi LaForge to take. And they have to come up with an explanation for why Geordi would do that, why Geordi LaForge is not acting like Geordi LaForge. And the answer, as it sort of always is this season, is that he's afraid for his kids. But I'm not sure what the upshot of this is, Bob. Is the story they're telling that becoming a parent utterly paralyzes you? Or it prevents you from making the good and right decisions, like changes you in a bad way? Surely that can't be the thing, but it's something that many, many people have had to overcome.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. Is it on purpose? Do you think it's a very careful thematic thing?
I do. I think it's a thematic thing, and I think that's why Geordi's doing this, and I think it's the simple and easy answer to how can Geordi create some drama in the episode. Like, remember the first watch through we did was for episode 2, and I had trouble figuring out, like, why is Picard acting like this? Why is Riker acting like this? And it always traced back to the kid. Picard would have a conversation with Beverly about parenting, and he'd come out feeling one way, and have a conversation with the kid and come out feeling a different way. And Riker is making these decisions that Picard doesn't want to do, but Riker feels this way because he doesn't want to lose these people, this family, this crew family, like he lost his family. And Picard comes to the bridge at a certain point and says, I understand your fear of loss. But then Picard also acts that way. And it's very much, look, Beverly Crusher's entire backstory leading up to this is, I did a bad thing to keep my son away from this. Like, this is the theme. This, like, family plus paralyzed parents is a theme. But sometimes, in fact, more than a couple of times, because that's happened, it's made people act differently. Now, I'll give you the best case argument, which is, well, they're acting differently, Dave, because they weren't parents the last time you saw them. And parenthood changes people. That's the best I've got.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting if you think about it, because the whole song and dance, at least at the beginning of TNG, was that there's going to be families on the ship.
Yeah.
But really, nobody was a family person, were they?
I think essentially one of the themes, or at least a strong implication, is that you can't do things like they did week to week on The Next Generation if you had a family. You just can't do it.
Yeah.
Right? And like, family complicates everything. We'll get back to that at the very end too. Yeah, that's the paralyzed parents problem is a theme. I struggle with it, but to be fair, they weren't parents the last time I saw them. And actually, the only two exceptions to this rule, I guess now that I think about it, are Picard, who jumped to the aid of Beverly because he didn't really have a family, although he had a girlfriend who they dispensed with really quickly. But it was clear in that scene that his goodbye there was not going to be I'll be back in a couple of days, even though that's what he said. It's more like I'll see you in 3 months. Diane Chambers leaves Cheers sort of thing. And Riker jumped to Picard's aid, or jumped to Picard's side at the beginning of this season, but they explained that because he didn't have a good family life. So it's consistent, but I'm not sure I love it, is maybe the way to say that.
Yeah.
Geordi and his daughter Sydney, Ensign Sydney from the Titan, have a heart-to-heart. He says, come with me, essentially, and you won't get in trouble. And she says, nope. And she gives a really good speech. She says, the galaxy is at stake here, Dad. I've seen a corpse that looked just like me. I know what these changelings are capable of. He says, we need to leave that to Starfleet. And her answer is, I am Starfleet. He says, I need you to be thinking about us. And she tells a story about how she grew up listening to his adventures on the Enterprise. And he says, well, that was a different time. And she says, in maybe the worst writing, it's such a weird line. She says, no, it is you and I that are different. That is not how human beings speak. Do you remember, you pointed this out when Mario 64 came out in 1996
I think you cannot.
or whatever. It was like, oh boy, whoever was on the translation. Do you think you can beat me? I think you cannot.
There's that trope of funny Japanese translated poorly into English.
Yeah. I know I'm nitpicking here, but just that line stood out to me. I thought, well, what would my line reading of "It is you and I that are different" be that would make it sound better? And I don't have one. I just think it's a weird line.
It is you and I.
Right. No,
it is you who are the ball lickers.
There you go. He says he's not his sister. She says she's not her sister. So her sister, Alondra, is an engineer like her dad. She's a space jockey. That's an Alien reference. And he acts like a dad. He says, essentially, I was terrified when your ship went missing, and she says, I'm on the run with my crew. And Geordi says, they're not your family. And she says, yes, they are. You taught me that, and I'm not scared to step up and to help them. You are. So, boom. But we're also like, this is, you want to talk about reoccurring themes. Crew is family. scared dads, faith. She says at one point, if you believed in me, she says, you took, her being interested in things that weren't engineering. She says to him, you took that as rejecting me, but I always thought it brought us closer together. You would believe this if you believed in me. And he looks shook when she says that, but it's faith, right? Remember, Riker's the guy who lost faith. All of that stuff is culminating in here. It's cleverly crafted, even if it doesn't always work for me.
You and I are getting two very different things out of this series.
Interesting.
You are really enjoying breaking down these scenes and these sort of emotional moments and the dramatic beats and the, what the characters are thinking and the themes. And when any of these scenes start for me, I just basically tune out and start paying attention to like, what does the uniform look like? What is the set? When are they showing the Enterprise again?
Okay.
Do you know what I mean? Like I'm waiting for the next moment of plot advancement and for member berries. So you're definitely getting a lot more out of this than I am, I think.
I'm diving in, man. I am chewing on the scene, every scene like Moriarty.
Like I am still unclear exactly what happened with Geordi in this episode because this episode is this episode's probably my favorite because
interesting.
It moves the fastest, right? And there's the most things happening and the most I hate to say revelations, but that's, I guess, what I'm saying. But I think the budget may be seen in this litany of scenes that are all similar in every single one of these episodes, which is two people alone in a room having a heart-to-heart, which happens, it seems to be happening over again. I'm not exactly sure what the upshot is of the Jack and Picard one at the beginning in 10 Forward. I'm not exactly sure if I had to write down the chain of events with Geordi. I guess I knew that he was, Picard's on the run and he's worried for his daughter, and that's about what I got out of it.
Well, there's resolution.
Yeah.
We'll talk about it in a minute. It won't be long. Picard tells Seven after this conversation between Geordi and his daughter, Picard says it's time to return to Daystrom Station to find Shaw and strategize. Then the kids are in the hall, so it's the kids in the hall. Is this scene, Bob? The kids in the hall.
There you go.
That's what happens here. The three of them, so the two daughters and Jack, two of them decide, Jack and Sydney decide to stay on the Titan. I'm not sure if Alondra does, but Jack proposes some minor larceny. If Alondra will help him find something using her knowledge of the Starfleet Museum, then we wind up back on Daystrom Station, and they, again, and I do not have a way to make this line better, but they give it to Rafi, and she goes, so Starfleet installed this insane AI to defend its deepest secrets? It's the most let me get this straight line ever. I mean,
now,
they're
wait
just
a
setting
minute.
the table, but right. That Data recognized them here. What they've realized, though, in this part is that because Data recognized them as they were wandering around means that he sees everything in the station, which further means that he would have seen whatever the changelings stole earlier. So this is the point where I think Worf is the one who realizes that the manifest they've been talking about this whole episode is in fact Data. And that means they're getting him out. Nice. And the security comes online in the station, which means actual humans charging at them. Riker calls Picard, but there's nobody to hear him because at this point they're still with Geordi. There's a great little scene, or a great little part of the scene where Shaw is talking to Geordi, and he is completely starstruck. And for a guy whose entire thing is, I do not care about your legends, to be starstruck by a legend is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
He's always tough and in control, but not now.
It's funny that it's Geordi and not Picard and Riker.
Right? Yeah. That's what he's into. Although they had him cleaning, they had him fixing. He was being a mechanic a couple
he's the
episodes
grease monkey
ago, so,
from
Geordi, the ship cloaks while they're on it, and Geordi is again mad at Picard and says, "You stole the goddamn cloaking device from my bird of prey." And then they realize in a really funny moment, he's like, "I didn't do that." And then they're looking at each other, and there's this great shot of Picard at the left and Geordi at the right, and they realize it was the kids. They say their kids' names. It's like, okay, it's a fun little parent moment.
This is another thing that I think about all the time for my own, Star Trek series. It will certainly get made. I feel the Star Trek universe has a cloaking device problem. And I haven't seen every episode, and I don't know all the ins and outs of lore, but it doesn't make any sense to me that Starfleet doesn't have a cloaking device. It just doesn't work.
It's illegal?
It does not work. I mean, look, yeah, nuclear weapons are not a good idea, but it doesn't work if only one country has them, right?
Right.
It doesn't work if
That's a good
only the U.S. had nuclear submarines or if only the Soviet Union had subs. So I think of cloaking devices as the ultimate submarine metaphor in the Star Trek universe.
Okay.
So like, maybe something like an Excelsior or a Galaxy class is like an aircraft carrier, sort of, right? Or like a great big battleship. But a ship with a cloak is like how on Earth in our navies, some of our ships can go underwater and it's hard to find out where they are. It's easy to spot when a aircraft carrier, when we send a carrier somewhere, half the reason they do that is to as a show of force. But the submarines' whole point is they're very hard to find. So I still don't understand how this is supposed to work, how the Romulans have a cloaking device, the Klingons have cloaking devices, but the Federation doesn't. So then how doesn't...
Just hamstring themselves?
Yeah, like how do the Romulans and Klingons not just own the entire galaxy then?
I don't have a good answer for you there.
Thank you.
You're welcome. The kids are working on getting the cloaking device stable. They need to, I wrote this down, oscillate the power resonators or adjust the reflective index, obviously.
Yeah.
And if they screw it up, they will cripple the entire ship, they say. Geordi says that removing the cloaking device from the bird of prey when the kids stole it tripped an alarm. So now Starfleet's coming to get them. And Geordi asks Picard if he has any idea how many Federation treaties it violates. I assume that's the not just the stealing, but also the installing on a Federation ship.
Maybe.
Of the cloaking technology.
Okay.
And Picard says, well, I guess they'll just have to add it to my tab. We need you. She needs you.
Or
Mm-hmm.
we're the Federation, baby. If we want to use a cloaking device, what are you going to do?
I guess that's true.
Yeah.
So the kids are still trying to, there's sparks flying as the kids are trying to fix this thing.
Literal sparks? Or you mean Jack and...
sparks.
Okay.
I mean literal sparks. And we see the Titan phase back into visibility. Sydney says that she doesn't know how to fix it. And then Geordi G.D. LaForge says, but I do. And he tells Jack to stay away from his daughter. So now we get to see Geordi as engineer back on Daystrom Station. Picard says they've got 90 seconds before they'll be there, and they're going to have to leave. Tick that clock, Bob. They're cloaking, and everybody's like, how are they cloaking? How are they cloaking? And Worf, another comic line says, superior Klingon technology, he presumes.
Now that's a good Worf line, because that's the kind of thing that Worf would have said. I think other people have pointed this out. The thing that maybe bumps me a little bit about Worf this season is Worf knows he's being funny now.
Yeah.
Whereas Worf was always funny because he was very deadpan and maybe didn't quite realize he was being funny.
Right.
But that was good. That was classic Worf. And you know what? Question about this is how are they talking to them? Again, this is a technical question. I don't have all the answers, but I would think, isn't it normally the rules of Star Trek when
they got there? They took off and they got there. They fixed the damn thing, and then they warped there and said you got 90 seconds.
Okay, so they were near them when they contacted them back on the communicators.
Right.
Okay.
They get there and Shaw's like, nobody can see him or nobody can see us. But
okay.
But the rule is. You have to decloak to beam because that's better for tension. You know?
Yeah.
So to decloak, so as long as they're cloaked, nobody can see them or find them, which was the central problem of they're being chased, and everybody can find them. So this solves that. But to get their friends off of the place they broke into, they have to decloak, which means all of the better ships are going to see them and come after them. Rafi says as they're trying to get out of there, we're not going to make it. And Riker says, oh, yeah, we will. And he cocks his gun.
Exactly what he said.
He says, oh, yeah, we will. Yeah, no, we won't not make it, he says. I think you cannot not make it. And Riker locks and loads and walks out to fend off Starfleet security, and I may have at this moment screamed no into an empty room, Bob, because I thought, oh, I hope they don't do the worst. Shaw says at this point, now the Titan's being chased, so Shaw says to lock onto whatever you can and warp away. They do. Riker takes what looks to me like a Camino saber dart to the back.
Of course.
This baby belongs to them cloners. What you got here is a Camino saber dart.
And collapses, and the Titan warps away. So Geordi greets Worf as he comes back on to the Titan and sees Data, and that is important.
I like this scene because as you were watching this scene, as soon as they beam on, everybody in the room should be like, "Holy Christ, is that old Data?" Like that should be the first
thing.
Were
standing in front of him.
Exact. Worf is directly standing, and the way the camera is positioned is that you're Geordi's POV. And you're looking directly at Worf, who was standing directly in front of the other guy on the transporter pad, which wouldn't have worked like 5 seconds before that when he stepped off the transporter pad.
No.
But they have to have this moment of like, okay, let's all talk about this calmly for a second.
Yep. So Geordi sees Data, which is a big moment if you watched TNG. Because they were best friends, Geordi and Data.
They were frequently paired up, yeah.
Yeah, right. They were buddies.
Yeah.
And unlike, say, Picard season 1, which wants you to think that Picard and Data were great friends, they were in fact not.
Even though, as you said earlier in this episode, and Mike did a montage in one of their videos about just Picard being a dick to Data constantly.
That's another Red Letter Media. Bottoms up. Does Beverly give a hug here? I don't remember.
She really hope so.
Worf and Picard talk. He vows to find Riker. Picard said he believes Mr. Worf. They shake on it. So I think that's your setup for the next episode.
Mm-hmm.
This is another just leitmotif. This is belief. This is faith. Picard believes Worf.
He's in the clutches of the vile gangster.
Oh, there you go. Sydney wanted her dad to believe her. You know, they're all doing this because they believe Ro Laren's plot. Riker had no beliefs at the beginning of the season. This plays a part in it. And then there's a little scene. So you said earlier you didn't understand the point of the bar scene. In part,
Not that I didn't understand it. It was that I had just sort of filtered it out.
Oh, okay.
I was not paying attention.
Got it. Well, this gives a little resolution, right? They built up that tension and they kept it there because Jack was mad at his father for passing down a genetic disease. And in fact, Jack, that's pissed me off when I got cancer from my mom.
Oh.
What a jerk. He says to his dad, he basically says, look, I'm not such a terrible guy. And a lot of the things like bravery, loyalty, he says he's far wiser than he has any right to be. And he didn't know where those traits came from because they weren't obviously of his mother. She's not brave or loyal or wise, apparently, now that I read this uncharitably. But he said, maybe you just didn't give me some.
No, wait a minute. But he lists other positive. Positive.
Oh, yes. He starts by saying, I got all of this good stuff from my mom.
And we're talking about Beverly Crusher, so he was being very charitable, too.
Is that true?
Yeah, he was being very charitable about good old Beverly Crusher.
Call her Bev.
I'm a famous hater of Beverly Crusher.
I know. Infamous, you might say.
Yes.
Inside the Federation.
That's right.
Or Starfleet. There's a resolution scene like that between Geordi and Sydney next. He says, and this is, they work it out. They make it okay in a sentence or two. He says, I'm not mad at you for what you did. He said, I'm disappointed in myself for not doing what my younger self would have done. I'm proud of you, Sydney. Very proud. And that is basically Geordi agreeing with my argument. He didn't hear me make the argument, but it's basically Geordi saying like, oh yeah, I wasn't acting like Geordi.
Yeah. See, these are all the scenes that are immediately, that I'm going to have no hesitation, just directly on the chopping block in Bob Drummond Presents, Bob Drummond's fan edit of Picard season 3.
Okay. I like it because but this scene was like an inversion of the I'm not mad, I'm disappointed. But Dad was mad and disappointed at himself, not his daughter. I thought that was kind of cute. In a nice little line, she says she crashed so many speeders as a kid, so that her and her dad could work together fixing them.
See, this is the sort of thing that I don't want to say bad writers do, but these are the sort of things. This is what you do, again, when you have to fill out 10 whole episodes and you need some kind of emotional resolution.
Everybody's got to have a little arc of...
Yeah, and there's no way you kept crashing things to spend time with your dad.
That's a thing that people do.
My kid would never... I destroyed so many video cameras, Dad, so that you and I could make more videos together. What? No, you...
That's not
Yeah,
a thing.
you would not... I would kill you.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, it's not nice. It's stupid.
Thank
I take
you.
it back.
Thank you.
All right, here's the big scene.
There we
Picard,
go. Okay.
Worf, Beverly, Geordi, and Data.
Yes.
Picard says, "This is hard. I've watched Data die twice now. It's pretty good." So Geordi explains that this Data is something else. And Beverly, in one of her 4 lines, says, "In some kind of miraculous, almost human positronic body. Best I can tell," Geordi says, "the different personalities have yet to be integrated. I mean, but the information's all there. So all of those people we talked about earlier," Geordi says, assuming he's sane enough to speak, he'll be able to tell us what they stole from Daystrom. He turns Data on. Data opens his eyes. There's color in his face. It's a little not jarring, but it's different. He doesn't have metallic yellow skin. This is not that Data.
I don't know. Again, it seems like he was made to be almost... It almost appears to me as though Brent Spiner was like, can you do it so that it's not as difficult to apply the makeup? Doesn't it seem like it's sort of like half Data makeup?
Well, but if he's the same Gollum as, more or less the same Gollum as Picard, then he doesn't need it. He wouldn't need to make that argument because
it still looks like his skin has a bit of a color to it. That's almost...
Well, you know what he has?
Yes.
He's got yellow eyes too.
Yep.
Data says, "There are many of myself inside Daystrom android M510, but currently one voice speaks to you more fondly than the others," which is, of course, Data.
Mm-hmm.
Picard asks, can he say what they stole? And Data says, well, they think he's glitching out because he keeps saying Jean-Luc Picard. And then he turns on an upgrade that Picard does not have, but eye projectors. Ooh, I have to say, right before that, another personality asserts itself and he turns into Lore.
Yeah.
And you know what this reminded me of? Christopher Reeve in Superman.
Yeah. He just takes off the glasses and he sort of straightens up.
And he's clearly Superman. Half a second later, he was Clark Kent. He takes off glasses and changes his posture slightly. And he is 0% Clark Kent, 100% Superman. And he gives a smile that is 100% Lore. And I loved that.
Yeah.
Worf, when he was glitching out, or they thought he was glitching out, Worf asked if there was a reset switch, which is...
Again, that is another... See, but that works again, because that is just the straight to the point, deadpan, can we just turn him on and off real fast?
So the personalities inside him are at war. He is Lore, he is B4, he is Soong. I guess he's also Lol.
That's kind of creepy.
Yeah. And it turns out, yes,
I'm a
the
little
thing that they
girl
stole.
too.
Okay. And they stole... And he uses his yellow eyes. I guess that's what, I don't know, Picard doesn't have, but that's why Data has the yellow eyes, is because they're projectors and Picard has regular eyes because they're not projectors. And the stolen thing is, of course, Picard's body.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah. I don't know why they want it, except we'll talk about that, I think, in a minute in the speculation segment. I think I might know why they want it, but I don't fully understand it. But yeah, they weren't after, we're thinking, well, maybe they do think it's a weapon. I don't know. We'll find out. The Kirk body thing makes a little more sense too, because I think the Kirk body thing was basically foreshadowing this. It's a tomb too. It's a little weird that Starfleet takes the bodies of dead captains and puts them in cold storage, but it's not terrible.
Yeah, okay. I mean, they're
Section
very,
31
very
does,
notable people. Yeah, they're very...
It's true. We do, yeah.
I know, and maybe they're deaths that are very strange, that are scientifically interesting.
Yeah, so now we go to, it starts with Daystrom Station, and Riker is there, and he's getting interrogated, and he says he wants the location of Picard and the Crusher Boy, says a Starfleet security officer. And Riker, being very Riker, says, like hell I will. He's almost enjoying taking a beating to help his friends at this point.
Yeah.
That just feels very Riker. He's the right person to have abducted and beat up, I guess is what I want to say. The security guard turns around, kills the other security officers, and transforms into Vadic, weirdly giggling Vadic. And then they take him over to the Shrike, and Riker might have my favorite line in the whole episode where he looks up at the big guy and says, "Oh, look at this one. How much of that goose shit did they pour into you?" And I genuinely laughed out loud. Even my old man swearing policy has exceptions. How much of that goose shit they pour into you?
See, Riker, for some reason Riker
It's-
gets
yes.
a pass when he's being colloquial. Yeah, when he's just being sort of jokey.
It feels like something Riker would do.
Wait a minute,
Sure,
but
sure.
question about the previous scene when Vadic is it when she turns around and sort of disintegrates the other two security guards.
Yeah.
Were they? So then, are we to understand that those were not changelings, and she's just
Yeah, I think so.
there were Starfleet guys just
Yeah,
there while they're
right.
beating the shit out of? Why would?
Starfleet is infiltrated by changelings, I think, but not entirely changelings.
Well, but why would they just be standing there while they're beating the shit out of a legendary captain? Or maybe they were changelings because she already killed
Could be. But why would she kill them?
the bridge changeling earlier. Yeah, I don't know. That's one of those things that looks cool, but I'm not sure it makes a lot of sense.
I'm assuming they were Starfleet and she was just able to somehow. I don't know how the heck she got. Like, if they were Starfleet and she infiltrated that, how did she get there? Well, I guess I know how she got there. She found that guy and killed him.
Yeah.
I don't
Or
know.
just-
like they engineered a way because
Yeah.
they've got people on every ship, as they've said before, or lots of ships, maybe not every ship. But anyway, Riker says, "You really think after 35 years of loyalty that I'm going to betray my friends for you?" And she says, "Vadic, no, Captain Riker, not for me." Closing the loop on, and that at that point is closing the loop on her on the first scene that she's in this episode, where she says, find all of Jean-Luc Picard's friends and associates. And a door opens, and there is Deanna Troi, and she says, "Oh, Will." Family, Bob, complicates everything. is what I'm
I
saying.
think we have everyone now, don't we? Is
Yep.
this everyone together?
I think that makes, if not together, there's nobody
Close to, yeah.
other than Barclay. I think nobody else to introduce.
Tasha
Tasha could
Yar,
be.
maybe. O'Brien.
The Tar Monster.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be. Oh yeah, they're still going to do that. Here's what I figured out.
All right.
I think by the end of it. Which
Wait,
is,
do we have to blow the spoiler?
No,
V'ger?
this is a. My leitmotif here is that family complicates everything.
Mm.
Riker's son and wife are pain points. Jack's a pain point. Geordi's kids are pain points. Deanna is a pain point. This is what I said earlier. Nobody doing what the Next Generation cast did week to week could do that with the traditional family, which is, I guess, Beverly's point at the beginning of the season. Right?
Interesting.
But
Yeah.
it's complicated. I think that's where they're going with this. And that ends this episode of Star Trek : Picard, Act 5, season, what do they call
Episode-
it?
this
Part
is epi-
5.
This
Part
is
6.
This was episode
The
6,
Bounty.
yeah. Can we briefly, before we move on to speculation, can we?
Yes.
Because we have not spoken about this. Can we have a moment?
Okay.
One of my favorite. I mean, I hate it when the episodes end, but I love to watch them walk away because those ending credits. Those ending credits are amazing.
Hey, do you think that the musical notes in the ending credit are the
Pop Goes the
was it
Weasel?
Pop Goes the Weasel?
I
Yeah.
think I think it may be.
Yeah.
You have been pretty hardcore about avoiding spoilers, and not. So have you even watched all of the closing credits?
I've probably let them play, but I have not paid much attention.
I think at this point you can probably watch it. But it is breathtaking because it is the music. It is Jerry Goldsmith's music from First Contact.
Oh, it's from First Contact. Okay.
And I'm not a huge fan. It's First Contact. Yeah, that's the one with the Borg, right?
Mm-hmm.
Star Trek 8.
Star Trek Borg was a full motion video
Star
game.
Trek Yeah, the one after Generations. I'm not a fan of the TNG movies. I think, like I've been saying, they're in a slightly different universe to the series. They let the TV guys keep making. Rick Berman was in charge and the TV writers, and I just think they just never They never made very good movies, and also they made it unlike the TV series. Like,
They really leaned into this idea that you had to make something different, I think, because it was on the big screen. You had to make basically action movies. And TNG had spent 7 seasons being like a show about people talking and diplomats.
but at the same time, it felt amateur somehow. Like, it felt that the story, the writing was not where it would work on the small screen. It just never came close to the heights of the TOS era films. I don't think.
I agree. And I've always found it somewhat bizarre because, as I've mentioned before, they had to make 24, 26 episodes a season.
Yeah.
That's 24, 26, not just 24, 26 plots, but there's like A and B plots and sometimes C plots within those episodes. And they didn't knock it out of the park, but they were clearly story machines. And then when it came to telling stories for the big screen, they just couldn't come up with like 5 home runs.
Yeah.
I'm making it sound easier than it is because not all things are home runs, but I think their batting average was way lower than average.
I don't know. Maybe
in the transition.
I feel like they needed like their own Nicholas Meyer or even the Nicholas Meyer to come in and sort of, someone who wasn't working on the show week in, week out to really hone it. But as much as I never really loved the movies, I adore Jerry Goldsmith. He did the score for the motion picture. I think the score for the motion picture is spectacular. He did a lot of great scores, and they brought him back after Generations. For Generations, they just used one of the TV composers. I think it was it Ron Jones? I don't really remember, but or no, it was Dennis McCarthy, who is a very well-known television composer, but sort of that bland TNG music. Mm-hmm. So they brought Jerry Goldsmith back for the rest of the TNG movies, and his scores are amazing. I think his scores are in a different universe to the movie. The scores are breathtaking. That main theme of First Contact is what you hear right when the credits start with the LCARS display and all that. And they edit it very tightly. So you get like the important movements of the First Contact theme, and then it goes into Jerry Goldsmith's version of the TNG theme from that soundtrack. So it's really brassy and it sounds very expensive. Those credits are I mean, as much as I like the show, when I can't get that mad when the episode's over because those closing credits are spectacular.
That's good. Yeah. For as much as I might nitpick a line here and there, this is, as I said last episode, I am bummed that it's going to end in less than a month. Yeah. This is way beyond my wildest expectations. You want to do speculation segment?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So the rule is basically if we figure out something from careful watching of an episode, then that's fine. If the show is foreshadowing, and I pick up on that, it's cool by me. Otherwise, I avoid these things. I think you're right. This is the episode in which they finally assembled the cast. They may not all have been in the same room, but yeah, they've done it. I don't know what the end of this story is, but we said this last week. I'm a little worried that they're running out of time. I mean, I know they plotted this out, but it does feel like, there feels like there's a lot to do.
Yeah, and it seems like the first 4 episodes are maybe sort of we're kind of stretched out a little bit, and then this one seemed to be kind of in fast forward.
Yeah, right. Here's my guess about maybe next episode. Worf says, there's that final scene where Worf says, I'm going to go kick some changeling butt and God help anybody who stands between me and Riker and Troy.
Yeah.
Though I don't think he knows about
Sisters.
There it is. I think that's probably where we find out what backstory Worf has. We still have to explain, I think, within the context of the show, why Worf is so different than he was. Alexander something, I don't know. But I don't think there's any more backstory to have, right? Like, we understand why Riker was the way he was, Picard was the way he was, Beverly explained why she is the way she is, Geordi explained why he was acting differently. The only person we don't know about is Worf, and if they're sending him off alone, or maybe Rafi goes with him, I don't know. But if they're sending him off on a mission, maybe that's 5 years ago, for Worf.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. All right, you want to hear my this just popped into my head fully formed, so who knows?
All right, let's go.
But here's my theory. So I said Why did they make Jack's Irrimatic? Am I getting that right? The IR syndrome that Picard also has, part of the plot. Could be because they were just trying to find something for the boys to bond over. It could be because that has something to do with the plot of the show, Bob. They often make everything count. Use the whole buffalo, as they call it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then why, as I pointed out earlier, why did Worf have that line about the virus that Starfleet introduced? It could just totally be backstory and filling out the stuff, but also if you're trying to clean stuff up, that line doesn't need to be there. Nobody needs to know that if it has no bearing. So what if the Starfleet virus or the cure created the evolved changelings? And what if somehow they think that not Irrimatic, it's not an instant syndrome, Irrimatic syndrome has something to do with that? I don't know what. A cure, a plague they want to infest on everybody? Like that would explain why they were after Jack all of this time.
It's a fascinating, yeah, it's a distinct possibility, David.
Right. And thanks. And then my immediate thought was, well, why aren't they after Picard, which I thought of in the middle of the episode. And by the end of the episode, I went, oh, they were after Picard, the one who didn't survive Irrimatic syndrome. The Picard who's walking around is the one who didn't beat it. He just switched He died and switched bodies.
Yeah,
so,
I don't know if the plague angle and the virus and the cure and all that, it seems oddly topical in a not in a fun way, like in a very divisive way.
Oh, were you around for that?
Yeah.
You remember that?
Yeah.
Where nobody saw each other for a long time? That was fun.
Yeah. But that's fascinating. Yeah, I just took all that as just, they're just, giving you a recap.
That is what they want you to think.
All right. You're right.
Yeah, I really wasn't trying to figure anything out, but there it was suddenly.
Yeah, the timing is funny because on the one hand, it seems like we don't have enough time left. On the other hand, there are 4 episodes left, and Frontier Day's in 2 days their time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting to see what they're. So I have heard people explain, like I said, the first 4 episodes were the first act, the next 4 episodes were the second act, and then the final 2 are like the finale. So we still have another, if we're going by that sort of template, there's still episodes 7 and 8.
Yeah, buddy.
Before we even get to the grand finale.
I'm very excited. I don't want it to end. I can't believe how much fun I'm having.
Well, no one wants it to end, and Metalis is now on record saying that he has an idea of what he wants to do. He wants to have a series he is calling at the moment Star Trek Legacy, which will just continue on in this 25th century.
Sure.
Probably, I would assume, Shaw, 7 of 9.
Yeah.
And
there you go.
It's great because
then like occasional guest appearances.
Yeah,
sure.
Now I have a bit of homework for you, young man.
Whoa, hit me.
I would like you at some point in the next week to watch my fan edit of the first 4 episodes. I'm not going to tell you what I did, though I think you could probably you probably have an idea what I did.
It's all shots of spaceships.
I do think I cut one out, and at the moment I was like, ooh, I really should cut from this shot to that shot, but that means I'm going to skip an entire effect shot. And part of me was going to do like 2 almost identical Titan shots back to back, just because I didn't want to lose any Titan shots. Yeah. You probably have an idea what my strategy was. And once you start watching, you're going to rapidly figure out what my strategy was.
Okay.
But what I need you to do is you're very good with notes from what I hear. I need you to just jot down, because I kind of did a hack job. I did it really fast in the morning today. So I didn't spend a lot of time like going through the plot and saying, oh, wait, what if I cut this out? Is this going to make sense? So if there's anything in there you think that I really need to put back in to just make sense, that if I'm really missing something critical, feel free to let me know.
I will do that.
All right.
Until next time, say something from Star Trek now.
Disengage tractor beam, Mr. LaForge.